A nurse saves a Navy SEAL by removing 30 bullets from his body. But the next day she's fired. Within just 24 hours, she discovers those bullets hide a dangerous secret, and her life will never be the same. Now, she's the target of a deadly conspiracy. Before you listen to this thrilling story, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more stories like this. Let's begin. It was a night like any other at the hospital. The cold hallway lights seemed dimmer than usual, and the clock in the emergency room ticked slowly, each sound echoing in my chest. I had been on shift for almost 12 hours, thinking only about getting a coffee so I wouldn't fall asleep in my chair. Suddenly, the ER's automatic doors burst open. 2 men in military uniforms rushed in, pushing a stretcher. On it lay a motionless body. I knew right away this wasn't an ordinary patient. His skin was pale, his clothes soaked in blood, and his arms were covered with tattoos I'd never seen before. Symbols, numbers, and an insignia I recognized from documentaries. He was a Navy SEAL, an elite U.S. Navy soldier trained to operate in the sea, the air, and on land. Men like him don't just show up in a regular hospital, unless something very serious has happened. "We need a room now," one of the soldiers shouted, without even looking at me. We moved him quickly to the operating room. Seeing him up close took my breath away. His body was riddled with bullet wounds, too many. Not 5, not 10, but far more. Each injury seemed to tell a story of a fight. But the strangest thing was the silence. None of the men who brought him in would say what had happened. They didn't give any details, didn't ask for a medical update, didn't even leave their names. They just looked at me as if they knew I wouldn't ask questions, and left. I was alone with the patient. The weight of the situation pressed down on my shoulders. The bleeding wouldn't stop, and I knew that without immediate action, he wouldn't see the morning. But I also knew cases like this always come with problems. Paperwork, officers asking questions, conflicting orders. Still, something inside me told me I had to act. I put on gloves, adjusted my mask, and stepped closer. The man was barely breathing, but his eyes opened for a moment. He stared straight at me, as if trying to say something. He didn't speak, but his look told me clearly he wanted to live. On the monitor, his pulse was dropping. I had to choose. Wait for a surgeon to arrive, or start working myself, even if it meant breaking protocol. Outside, the hallway was empty. In the silence, the ticking of the clock felt louder than ever. I picked up a scalpel and prepared. I didn't know the story behind those wounds, but I felt certain, if he died, something much bigger would be buried with him. The operating room was cold. The bright white light shone directly over the Navy SEAL's body, illuminating each wound like small craters on his skin. I put on another mask, tighter this time, because the smell of blood was heavy and thick. I held the scalpel carefully. It wasn't the first time I had treated gunshot wounds, but never under these conditions. He drifted in and out of consciousness, opening his eyes and closing them again as if fighting the pain. He didn't speak, but the tension in his hands showed he felt every second. The first bullet was in his right shoulder. The skin around it was burned, a sign it had been fired at close range. Slowly, I made the cut and used forceps to pull out the projectile. It was small, dark-colored, and when it dropped into the metal tray, it made a sharp, dry sound. Clink. "One," I whispered without thinking. Next was the second bullet in his side. It was deeper. I had to press hard to reach it. Again, the same sound when it fell. Clink. From there, the count kept climbing. 3, 4, 5. Each bullet seemed hidden in a different place. His arm, near the collarbone, in the thigh. Some were close to vital organs, and each time I found one, the heart monitor showed an irregular beat. It was like walking a tightrope. One wrong move, and it would all be over. As I worked, I noticed something strange. Some bullets had markings, symbols etched into their surface. That wasn't normal. I had never seen it before. "Who did this to you?" I asked, knowing he wouldn't answer. His breathing was heavy, but when I said those words, he clenched his teeth. Even wounded, he clearly didn't want to give me details. The blood kept flowing. I changed the gauze several times, trying to keep the area clean. My hands no longer shook because the medical instinct had taken over, but inside I felt that each bullet I removed wasn't just saving his life. It was also opening a door to a danger I didn't yet understand. I reached bullet number 20. I was exhausted, but I couldn't stop. The last ones were in his left leg, close to the femoral artery. With quick, precise movements, I pulled them out without causing further damage. 30. Exactly 30 bullets. I placed them on a steel tray, lined up, shining under the operating room light. They looked like a small army of metal, each one carrying a story he wasn't ready to tell. When I finished, I covered him with thermal blankets to prevent his temperature from dropping too much. His pulse improved, but he was still very weak. I left the operating room, carrying the tray of bullets in my hands. The nurses on duty looked at me without understanding. I said nothing. I just stored them in a sterile container and locked it twice. Something told me those bullets were going to mean trouble. The operating room fell silent. The heart monitor showed a steadier rhythm, and the Navy SEAL was breathing with a little less difficulty. I stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of what I had just done. I had broken protocol outright. I wasn't authorized to operate like this, especially not without a surgeon present. In a hospital, the rules are clear. Every procedure must be documented, with signatures, witnesses, and a full record to back it up. But in this case, there was nothing. No paperwork, no name on the admission form, not even a note from the team who brought him in. Officially, this man had never arrived. I stepped closer to the tray with the 30 bullets. Each one was lined up like evidence from a crime scene. I knew that if I handed them over to the right department, someone would start asking questions, and if someone dug too deep, I would probably be the first to pay the price. A weight pressed on my chest. On one hand, there was my oath as a nurse, to save lives no matter who the patient is. On the other, the rules reminded me that one wrong step could cost me my career, and something told me this case could cost me much more than that. I cleaned my hands, placed the bullets in a sealed container, and put them inside a personal locker I almost never used. I didn't know what I would do with them, but for now, they couldn't be in plain sight. "What am I doing?" I whispered to myself, looking at the floor. At that moment, I heard a faint groan. I turned and saw him trying to sit up on the bed. He shouldn't have, so I gently pushed him back down. His eyes locked on mine, intense, as if he were trying to read my thoughts. "You're safe here," I told him, though even I wasn't completely sure I believed those words. His breathing slowed, but he didn't look away until he fell asleep again. I left the room and went straight to the nurse's station. One of my colleagues asked why I had been in there so long. I told her the patient needed special care and that everything was under control. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. That night, I finished my shift without recording anything in the system. Not his name, not his condition, not the improvised surgery I had performed. It was as if it had all happened somewhere else, in another reality. As I changed clothes to go home, I noticed my hands were cold. It wasn't the weather. It was the feeling of having crossed an invisible line. And deep down, I knew there was no turning back. The sun was just beginning to rise when I left the hospital. The city was calm, holding that strange kind of silence that only exists in the first hours of the day. I could feel exhaustion in every muscle, but what weighed on me most was what had happened in the operating room. I walked toward the parking lot with my hands in my pockets, my mind full of questions. In the pocket of my lab coat, I still carried the key to the locker where I had stored the 30 bullets. I couldn't stop thinking about them, or about the Navy SEAL's face. There was something in his eyes that had marked me, as if he had asked for help without saying a single word. When I got home, I collapsed onto the bed without even taking off my shoes. Sleep came quickly, but it was restless. Images of the operating room mixed with the sound of gunfire and screams. Sounds I couldn't tell were real or just creations of my exhausted mind. I woke to the ring of the landline phone. Almost no one called me at that hour, especially not on that number. I dragged myself to answer. Hello? On the other end, a man's voice, firm and without hesitation, spoke. You were in the operating room last night with a patient who does not appear in the records. I froze. Who is this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. That doesn't matter. Listen carefully. No one must know what you did. Not your coworkers, not your superiors, no one. If you talk, there will be consequences. The call ended before I could respond. I stood there with the phone in my hand, listening to the dead tone. I didn't have much time to process it, because just a few minutes later, my cell phone began to vibrate. This time, it was the hospital. A much friendlier administrative voice asked me to come in immediately for an urgent procedure review that had just been scheduled. Something didn't feel right. They had never called a meeting like that so quickly, especially after a long shift. I dressed in a hurry and headed back to the hospital, my stomach tight. When I walked in, I sensed a different atmosphere. Some people looked away when I passed, as if they knew something but didn't want to say it. A supervisor handed me a folder with blank pages and said, "We need you to sign here stating that you had no contact with any patients outside of protocol last night." I looked her straight in the eye. "And if I did?" I asked, trying to read her reaction. She gave me a forced smile. "Then you will have very serious problems." I felt a knot in my throat. I stayed silent and didn't sign. I excused myself, saying I needed time to read what they were giving me. I walked out of the office with the feeling that every step I took was bringing me closer to a cliff's edge. The hallway to the meeting room felt longer than usual. My footsteps echoed hollow against the shiny floor, and with each step I felt closer to a place I wouldn't leave the same. The door was slightly open. Inside, 3 people were waiting for me. The hospital director, a lawyer, and the head of nursing. "Please have a seat," the director said, without smiling. I sat down across from them, trying not to show any nerves. I had learned to stay calm with patients in crisis, but this was different. Here, I was the patient, and I wasn't sure there would be a cure. "This meeting is to clarify certain events that occurred during your last shift," the head of nursing began, looking through some papers. "According to our records, you spent several hours in the operating room, but there is no record of any formal admission." "That's correct," I replied. "It was an emergency, and I acted according to—" "According to what?" the lawyer interrupted. "Some protocol you made up? Because we found no patient in the system matching the description we were given." I stayed silent. If I told the truth, I knew I could be putting myself in danger. But if I lied, they'd catch me in seconds. "I can't give details," I said finally. The director stared at me, as if searching for a crack in my expression. "Can't or won't?" "I can't," I repeated, keeping my tone steady. An uncomfortable silence followed. The lawyer shut the folder with a sharp snap. "What happened last night doesn't stay here. Someone from outside the hospital has already contacted us. According to them, you treated a wanted individual and hid evidence." The words hit the table like a brick. My body went cold. "Wanted? By who?" "I'm not going to discuss rumors," I replied. "I just did my job." The director leaned forward. "And that's why you no longer work here." The head of nursing slid an envelope toward me. Inside was my termination letter. No long explanations, just serious breach of medical protocol and concealment of information. I stood up slowly. I understand. No one responded. They escorted me to the door as if I were a stranger. Outside, 2 security guards stood in the hallway. They said nothing, but their cold stare said enough. I walked toward the exit without looking back. Outside, the day was sunny, but to me, everything felt covered in a thick cloud. In the pocket of my jacket, the key to the locker weighed like a stone. Losing that job meant losing more than a paycheck. I had lost the protection of being inside a system. Now, I was alone, and holding something that seemed far too interesting to dangerous people. Exactly 24 hours had passed since I'd left the hospital with my termination letter in hand. 24 hours that felt like an entire week. The first night, I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the 30 bullets on the steel tray, shining under the operating room light. The house was silent, too silent. I had spent the entire day pacing back and forth, not knowing what to do. Sometimes I'd sit at the table, open the dismissal letter, and put it back again. It was as if reading it over and over might change the words, but it never did. I turned on the TV to distract myself, but it didn't work. Every channel seemed to be talking about crimes, disappearances, things that reminded me of the man I had saved. The Navy SEAL was still in my head. His gaze, his wounds, the silence of the men who brought him in. None of it fit into anything normal. By mid-afternoon, I decided to go to the hospital to empty my locker. I didn't want anyone else finding the bullets. I walked quickly through the parking lot and went in without making eye contact with anyone. Luckily, no one stopped me. I opened the locker, and there they were untouched. The sealed container felt heavier than before. I slipped it into my bag and left immediately. On the way home, I had the feeling someone was following me. I kept checking the rear-view mirror, but saw nothing unusual. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe not. That night, while I was eating dinner, the phone rang again. I stared at it for a few seconds before answering. It was the same voice I had heard the day before. "I told you not to talk," he said, without greeting me. "I haven't said a word," I replied, trying to sound firm. "Then don't. You're already being watched." The call ended. I stayed seated, frozen. The sound of the clock on the wall seemed louder than ever. I got up, closed the curtains, and checked the locks. Then I turned off all the lights, as if the darkness could protect me. I didn't know where the danger was coming from, but I was certain it was getting closer. That night, for the first time in a long while, I slept with a kitchen knife next to my bed. And as I tried to fall asleep, one thought kept circling in my mind. What happened in that operating room wasn't an accident, and whatever comes next will probably be much worse. It was almost 11 at night when I heard the knocks at the door. They weren't gentle taps, but 3 sharp, heavy bangs. Like whoever was on the other side wanted to make it clear they wouldn't leave until I opened. I stayed still, not making a sound, hoping they'd go away. But the knocks came again, harder this time. "I know you're in there," a deep voice said from outside. My blood ran cold. I didn't recognize the voice, but the way he spoke made it clear he knew exactly who I was. I grabbed the kitchen knife I kept beside the sofa and moved toward the door without opening it. "Who is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just need to talk. It's about the man you treated at the hospital." My heart skipped a beat. No one should know about that. I didn't answer. He kept going. "If you let me in, I'll tell you why you're in danger." I opened the door just enough to see a face. A man in his 40s, with several days' worth of beard and a black cap. His eyes looked tired, but there was an urgency in them. I hesitated for a few seconds, and Against all instinct, let him in. He stepped inside quickly, glancing around as if he expected someone to be following him. "We don't have much time," he said. "What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this house." He sat at the table and set down a manila envelope. He opened it and pulled out several photos. In them was the Navy SEAL, but not in the hospital. The images showed a dark alley, an exchange of briefcases, and in one, a group of armed men. He wasn't the victim of a robbery, like they might have led you to believe, the man explained. He was attacked because he had something he shouldn't have, and there are people who will stop at nothing to get it. I stared at him, not fully understanding. "And why are you telling me this?" "Because you were with him, and because the people who want him dead know you saved his life." My breathing quickened. Then he pulled out another photo, this time of the bullets, the exact ones I had sealed away in the container. These aren't ordinary bullets. Each one has a micro device inside. They're not meant to kill. They're meant to track. I felt the ground shift under my feet. "How do you know I have them?" I asked. He leaned closer. "Because they're watching everything. And right now, they know we're talking." He stood up and headed for the door. "Take this," he said, handing me a piece of paper with a phone number written by hand. "If anything happens, call. No matter the time." Before leaving, he looked at me seriously. "He's still alive. And what happens to you will depend on whether you choose to help him or not." I closed the door and stood there, holding the photos, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know if I could believe him. But deep down, something told me every word was true. I slept little after the stranger's visit. Every creak of the wood, every shadow cast on the walls felt like a threat. I kept waking with the sense that someone was standing in the darkness of my bedroom. At dawn, I decided I couldn't stay at home. I grabbed the container with the 30 bullets and the photos he had left me, shoved them into a backpack, and left without a plan. My only thought was to disappear for a few hours, change the scenery, think. I had barely walked 2 blocks when I noticed a black vehicle parked in front of a shop, engine running. Inside were 2 men, both wearing dark glasses and serious expressions. As I passed by, one of them lifted a phone to his ear, speaking without taking his eyes off me. I kept walking, pretending I hadn't noticed, but quickened my pace. The sound of the engine behind me confirmed they were following. I turned down a side street, then another, trying to lose them. I reached a busy avenue and crossed between cars without waiting for the light. Horns blared, brakes screeched, driver shouted, but I didn't stop. A few blocks later, the sound of fast footsteps made me glance back. One of the men was running toward me. I didn't think. I just ran. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands sweaty, making it harder to grip the backpack. I darted into a small cafe and hid in the bathroom. My breathing was ragged as I tried to stay silent. After a few minutes, I heard voices outside. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized the authoritative tone. I stayed put until the voices faded away. When I stepped out, I saw a man sitting at a table by the window, looking right at me. It was the same stranger from the night before. He gave me a nod to come over. I hesitated, but I didn't have many options. "I told you they were watching you," he whispered when I sat down. "Now you know." I asked who they were. "People who don't want witnesses, and you're the only witness they can't control." He told me I needed to leave the city, at least for a few days. I didn't fully trust him, but I knew staying wasn't an option. He gave me an address and a name. "Go there. They'll help you," he assured me. We left the cafe together. He led me to an old blue car that didn't draw attention. He drove quickly through streets I didn't recognize, changing direction constantly, as if worried we were being followed. On the way, He explained that the Navy SEAL was still alive, but in a location known to almost no one. The attack on him had been planned to recover something he had, and the bullets I was carrying were the only clue. Midway there, a vehicle pulled up too close behind us. The stranger frowned. "Hold on," he said, turning sharply at an intersection and hitting the gas. The chase began. The roar of the engine and the screech of tires filled the air. My stomach lurched into my throat. At one point, the car behind tried to cut us off, but the stranger swerved into a narrow alley. The black car couldn't follow. We drove through increasingly empty streets until stopping at a closed auto shop. He knocked on the door 3 times, and a tall, broad man opened it. Without a word, he let us in. Inside, the place was dark, smelling of oil and metal. The stranger motioned to a small office in the back. "You'll be safe here for now." I sat in a chair, still breathing heavily. The backpack with the bullets was at my feet. The stranger looked at me seriously. "Don't trust anyone you haven't seen bleed for you." Before I could ask what that meant, he slipped out through the back door, leaving me alone with the echo of his words, and the feeling that my world was shrinking minute by minute. The auto shop was silent, except for the slow drip of water somewhere in the corner. Night had fully fallen, and I was still sitting in the small office where they had left me. The yellowish light of a hanging bulb barely lit the desk, but enough for me to see the backpack at my feet. I leaned down and opened it. Inside, the 30 bullets rested in their sealed container. I picked one up, rolling it between my fingers. At first glance, it looked ordinary, but now I knew it carried something else, something that had set this entire chain of events in motion. The attack on the Navy SEAL, my dismissal, the threatening calls, the chase. I took a deep breath and set the bullet on the desk. The stranger who had brought me here hadn't returned since slipping out the back door. Part of me thought he might never come back. Maybe he had left me here to be found. Or maybe he was trying to throw off whoever was following us. Almost an hour passed before I heard footsteps. It wasn't him. The door opened slowly, and a different man came in. He was younger, with short hair and a military-style jacket with no insignia. "You need to come with me," he said, not looking me directly in the eye. "Who are you?" I asked, staying in my seat. "A friend of the man who brought you here. He can't come back, but he asked me to take you somewhere safer." I didn't trust him, but I couldn't stay here forever either. I grabbed the backpack and followed him. We left through a side door into a dark alley. A truck was waiting. I climbed into the back seat. During the ride, he didn't say a word, and neither did I. About 20 minutes later, we arrived at an old brick building, its windows boarded up. Inside, I found something unexpected. A wide room with maps covering the walls, open laptops on tables, and several people working. Among them him, the Navy SEAL. He was standing, a bandage on his arm, his face serious. When he saw me, he came over. "Didn't think we'd meet again," he said with a half-smile. "Neither did I," I replied, not sure what else to say. He sat across from me and gestured to the backpack. "The bullets." I handed them over without a word. He placed them on the table and, using a small tool, opened one. Inside was a tiny electronic circuit. "These devices hold encrypted data," he explained. "Information they didn't want getting out." I stared at him, trying to process it. "And now what?" I asked. He looked me directly in the eyes. "Now I need your help." He told me the attack had been planned by a group operating inside and outside certain official agencies. They wanted to erase all traces of a failed covert operation. The bullets were the only remaining way to retrieve that data. "You could walk away," he said. "Pretend none of this ever happened and go back to your life. But if you do, they'll still come after you, because they'll know you know too much. The only way this ends is if we end it." I stayed silent. For years, my life had been about caring for patients, following protocols, obeying rules. And in just a few days, I had crossed lines I never thought I would. "I'm not a soldier," I told him. "I'm not asking you to be," he replied. "I'm asking you to be where I can't be, to carry something I can't carry, to help make sure this comes to light." I looked around. The people in that room worked with quiet focus. They were an improvised team, but each one seemed to have a purpose. I had never had one outside my work, until now. Finally, I nodded. "All right." He gave a small smile. "Then welcome to the team." That night, they gave me a new name, a new phone, and a place to stay. They also handed me a folder with instructions and escape routes, in case things go wrong. As I read, I realized something. My life as a nurse was over. No more white uniform, no more night shifts at the hospital. Now I was stepping into a world with no protocols, shifting rules, and where every decision could be the last. Before sleeping, I thought about everything I had left behind, and what lay ahead. I didn't know if I could ever go back to my old life. But there was one thing I did know. I had made a decision I couldn't undo. And as I closed my eyes, one last thing the Navy SEAL had said echoed in my mind. "Don't trust anyone, except the ones willing to bleed for you." If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell, and give a like so you won't miss more stories like this one. See you next time.